For the record, today is Tuesday, December 4th, 2007. We are at the Charlevoix Public Library in Charlevoix, Michigan, working on our Charlevoix Oral Traditions project. We are recording memories of veterans and Charlevoix elders. I am Judith Ivan, Assistant Adult Service Librarian, who is doing the interviewing, and helping me is videographer Rick Pierpont of Pierpont Productions in Harbor Springs, Michigan. Where were you born?
I was born here in Charlevoix on Newman Street.
Okay.
In 1914.
1914. And the month?
October.
October. Great. And when did your parents come to Charlevoix? If you were born here, when did they come?
Well, I lived with my grandparents until I was in the 7th grade.
Okay.
And but my grandfather died of a heart attack when I was in the 3rd grade. And that was my first deep sorrow that I felt in my life.
Yeah.
And anyway, then I lived with my grandmother until my mother moved back from Detroit.
From Detroit, okay.
And, well, I don't know. My grandmother was born in England, and she was kidnapped and brought over here by an aunt and uncle. And she was about, 14, I guess, because they brought her over here so that she could work. And,
Amazing.
but,
What did she do? What kind of work did she do?
well, when she was just a young woman, she helped her uncle, who was a slaughterer. He did slaughtering for people, and she helped.
In this area? Or where did she go to first?
Well, I think they settled out around in the Barnett area at one time, but that I can't be certain of.
So you're not sure when your grandparents came to the Charlevoix area?
No, I'm not sure.
What did your grandparents do here in Charlevoix?
Well, my grandfather was a logger. I don't know if you ever heard of a logger, but he owned 2 teams of horses. And in the wintertime, he would go to the various logging camps, and sometimes in the summer. And my grandmother would take me, and away we'd go, and we lived in shacks. And, what an interesting life. It was wonderful. And but, of course, when I had to go to school, I was 7 years old, so Grandma and Grandpa had to move into town so they could enter me into school. So I took the Charlevoix School, and Miss B. Harrington was the kindergarten teacher. Well, I was in kindergarten maybe 3 months, and she said, "This is no place for you," so she put me up in the 1st grade because grandmother had taught me.
Yeah.
And so that's why I caught up with the kids my age.
So then, did you lived in town then? Have you lived in town most?
Yes, we
most
lived
of
in
the-
town,
Okay.
So did you live with your grandmother then? After?
Yes, I lived with my grandmother till I was in the 7th grade. And I lived with Grandma then, at that time.
So what did she do for a living once your grandfather passed away?
Well, she house cleaned for people. She cleaned Dr. McMillan's house and worked for the McMillans, babysat for them at times, and also Mrs. Ben Brown. Ben Brown had an auto sales and business in Charlevoix. She worked for them. She worked for various ones, and she baked for different ones when some of them would have dinner parties. My grandma would make pies for them and their desserts.
So
And,
what do you remember about this school when you first started going here, this school?
well, I loved it, of course, because I always loved books, and I loved learning. And I think Sophia Manson was our 1st grade teacher, and she just spiked me ahead too. So I liked the school. I loved all the kids. In fact, I've loved everybody all my life, I guess, because I just love people.
Good for you.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the Depression years in Charlevoix? What was your life like during the Depression?
Well, everyone was in the same boat, so to speak. None of us had much money or much work, but we always had good food on the table. The grandparents knew how to have a garden, and Grandpa always put down carrots and things in a pit, like outside, and get those out in the winter. We had lots to eat. We never went hungry. In fact, other people came and had a good feast once in a while at Grandma's table. But no one was ever turned away. Yeah, even if they needed a night's lodgings, some of the friends or some of the old men who were bachelors used to come and they needed a place to stay. They never worried about it when they came to Grandma and Grandpa's. They were always given a comfortable bed.
So what was a Thanksgiving like then?
What was Thanksgiving like?
Thanksgiving like, yeah. What was it like to have a Thanksgiving? Did you invite friends and family over, or what was it for Thanksgiving?
Oh, my goodness, yes. We always had a house full. Yeah, and everybody brought their specialty dishes, and we always had a good time together. We played games in the afternoon. We had a Victrola, a Victor Victrola, and we liked music, and we had a lot of good records that my mother would get for us in Detroit and bring them up when she came. And we always enjoyed the good things of life.
Did you ever go visit your mother in Detroit, or did you
No, I didn't, because people didn't travel then.
Okay.
We were lucky to get to our relatives all around town here,
Yeah.
but we had to go by horse and sleighs or horse and wagon.
Okay.
And
Do you remember going on the sleighs?
oh goodness, yes.
Tell me a little bit about that. What was it like?
Oh, well, Grandma, if we went any distance, like to my aunt and uncle's out in the country, which was out by where the Montais had their business, they lived out there in the house, and we would go out in the wintertime by sleigh, and Grandma would always heat bricks in the oven and put them in the sleigh. We'd have warm feet and put blankets around us. We kept nice and warm, and it was such fun. We never felt put upon.
So did you just have a single horse that would take you, or a couple horses?
No, Grandpa had the team. Of course, there were no cars much at that time.
So would you take several people? How big was the sleigh? Would it hold 5 or 6 people? Or?
Oh, my goodness, it had a bed on it that was real long. There could be 15, 20 people in it.
Wow. So it was really pretty large.
Pardon?
It was pretty large.
Oh, yes, it was a large sleigh.
How did you meet your husband if he was all the way from Central Lake? What's the story behind that?
Well, I went to Central Lake one time with friends of mine, a gal friend and her folks, and they had relatives down there. So occasionally, they would ask me to go with them. Well, I still went when we were teenagers, and I just met him, but I never saw him again after I met him. But I met one of his cousins, and anyway, a girlfriend of mine in Charlevoix had a date with one of the fellas in Central Lake, and he was coming up to Charlevoix, and he brought this buddy with him. And of course, they wanted someone for the buddy, so it happened to be my husband. And
you were the someone.
And I met him then. I went with her, and so after that, then he came to Charlevoix. He graduated in '32 in Central Lake, and he was salutatorian of his class and president of the class. and he came to work at the A&P store. And Hank Buddy was the manager. And so Hank said, well, Pat was looking for work, and that was hard times in 30s.
32, yeah.
And so Hank said he could have a room with he and his wife, and also a pack of cigarettes.
Oh,
And that's what he worked for.
that's what he worked for, wow.
Just so he was on his own.
Yeah.
And when he was in Charlevoix, and that was the year I graduated, that he worked there. So we got together again. Thank you. And there were a lot of stores in town that were just here for the summer. There was an Italian fellow and his wife from Detroit. I know you've got somebody
No,
else.
it's fine. No,
We're
go
good.
ahead, go ahead.
But,
Finish this story.
They were Italian, and they had a produce store, and his name was Andy Grillo. And he and his wife, they were delightful. And when my folks had a restaurant downtown, they always bought everything there, and we bought some of the produce for the store from them.
Okay.
Yeah.
But he was just a summer worker.
Well, he had his own store.
Okay.
But they just had it open in the summer.
In the summertime only.
Yeah, but they were there several summers. Yeah. And then, of course, we had that nice Mont Withers restaurant, which was a very nice place.
Yeah.
And the boat Sylvia always docked here in the summer. And we had the fellows that worked on that used to eat at my folks' restaurant. My mother was a cook, and my stepdad was a cook. And so, yeah. But it was great.
Thank you.
Well, Rebecca tells me that you were a phone operator here.
Oh, yes.
When did the telephones come to Charlevoix?
Well, I don't remember that. When I was just a little girl, there were just a few phones that some of the neighbors had. But then my grandmother got one, and it was a crank phone that they put on the wall. And everybody could hear the other person's ring on a line. There were just so many lines and that were distributed around town. So, like, maybe your ring would be too long and one short if I wanted to call you.
Okay.
and somebody else would be 3 long rings.
Uh-huh.
And some of the women really enjoyed that, hearing those, because they could pick up the phone and listen to their neighbor's conversation.
No such thing as a private conversation.
No, oh my, no. No, that's right.
When did you become a phone operator?
Oh, that was after Pat Curtis and I were married. I had children at that time. And I only worked a couple of years in the summertime. I was just a temporary operator. And then, at that time when I was working, Bell cut over to dial.
Ah.
And when there was dial phone, they moved all of the equipment over to Petoskey, so there was no more telephone operators in Charlevoix. But they did take on the girls that worked here and offered them a job over there because they were out. Yeah.
Did very many of the girls take them up on it, or was transportation?
Well, no, just a few did.
Okay.
I wanted to, but my husband didn't want me to drive so far, and I'd be away from home too much because you'd have to work split tricks once in a while, and that was a hardship too. So, no, I didn't. I just stayed home then.
So tell us what it was like to be an operator then. What did you have to do? Did you have to know everybody's rings and all this?
Well,
and
we
how
each-
did it work?
We sat at a board, and there were, what do you call them? They were, there were cords all across here that you plug in. And if a telephone rang, if you tried to call him, your light would come on, so we'd plug in the cord there. You'd tell us who you wanted, we'd pick up another cord and plug it in there.
Oh, my.
Uh-huh.
So you really couldn't make any call without the telephone operator, could you?
No, you couldn't make a
Yeah.
phone call at all. Uh-huh.
So did
But
you?
I
did you
only
know-
worked 2 years or 2 summers, and that just as a temporary, so I didn't get in on a lot of that. But those girls were wonderful,
Yeah.
and they were all friends.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, when were you married? What year did you get married?
In 1934,
1934.
mhm,
Okay.
in October.
And what did your husband, Mr. Curtis, do?
Well, he was a meat cutter, and he worked at the A&P store. He was from Central Lake, Michigan, is where he was raised and graduated from high school there. And then we met, and he came to Charlevoix, and he worked at the A&P store, and he was a meat cutter. And James Krulik taught him the meat cutting business. And then the fall of '34, before we started our business, we went to Florida like crazy kids because we heard there was work down there. That was Depression time. So we had a sedan Ford, and we went to Florida
Wow.
and looking for work. But we only stayed a month because it was too hard. My husband got a little work at Miami Beach doing some painting in some apartments. And when we were there for just this short time, of course, we drove around to see things. And what now is Coral Gables down there, where all the beautiful, expensive homes are, movie stars and all live there now, was nothing but tumbleweed and sand spurs.
Oh, my.
That whole area was just nothing but flat sand and tumbleweeds. And so then when I went back again in 1967 to Florida, over those 30-some years, there was a lot of changes.
Big changes. Yeah, big
Yeah.
changes.
So you came back to Charlevoix. And
Oh,
then-
yes. We came back to Charlevoix, and we had a chance to rent a house for $5 a month rent. It was the friends of my folks. And this gentleman lived alone. He was divorced, and he rented a little apartment upstairs to a fella, an old man. We called him Grandpa Hamlin. And so we could rent for $5 a month if we heated the whole house, and I kept the hallways and bathrooms cleaned. So we did that, and I also worked at the Harold Alquist's dollar store, for a long time.
Was that the dime store that's on the corner where the clothing company now is?
Yes, uh-huh.
Okay.
It was there. But it wasn't there at the time I worked. It was down the street.
Okay.
They were down on the corner of Park Avenue and Bridge Street. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what it was like in the summer when all the people came up?
Pardon me?
Can you tell us what it was like in the summertime when everybody came up?
Well, when we came back from Florida, Mr. Dalquist hired me back and he gave my husband a job of driving the truck. He had 4 or 5 stores around, and my husband, Pat, took merchandise from one store to another. So he had a job. We were very fortunate. Didn't pay much, but we were lucky.
Yeah.
And then we decided that we wanted to go in business for ourselves with no money. So anyway, we heard of a store that had gone bankrupt, which was the Otto Smith store, and was a little neighborhood grocery. So we went to see about that, and we got that store, and we had it for a number of years.
Where
And
was
then we
that
bought
store?
the Arlusky store on the corner because it was a larger store, and it was all on one floor, where this building that we were in was Oh, it was an old building that had been moved there, but it had quite a few steps. You had to go up on a platform to get into the store. So we bought the Orlusky building. Mr. Orlusky, my husband used to go over and offer to help Mr. Orlusky at his store because he was old and his kids went to college, and when there was no one there to help him, why, he'd go over, and his wife also helped him, but Pat would go over and offer to help him. So when he became real ill and wanted to sell, but he wanted to sell it to my husband. He wanted to give him the opportunity of buying it because he thought the world of Pat. And
Where was the Orlesky building?
right on the corner of Upright and Bridge Street, and there's a paint store, I think, in there now.
Okay.
And also, after my husband died, I sold that property to Fochman Motor, and they had a Fochman Motor.
I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
So how long did you have the store at the Lusky place? For several years?
Oh, yes, we did, uh-huh. And then we sold it. My husband couldn't be handling meat anymore. He became allergic to the fresh meat.
Wow.
So we had to get out of the business, and we bought this home on Loeb Road. Or, well, there was no home there. It was just property, and then we had a house built there. Mm-hmm.
So your store was a grocery store then, and meat store?
Groceries and meats, everything.
Everything?
Produce, everything.
Okay.
Did you do pretty well?
Oh, yes, we did very well. Mm-hmm.
And what happened when all the people came in the summer, all the tourists came up in the...
Well, of course, they traded downtown with the A&P store and Kroger's and some of the old established stores that had been there for years that they'd trade with. But we had a good business. We had mostly local business. And we loved our local people anyway because they were the bread and butter in the wintertime.
Sure.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And we also, several of the commercial fishermen traded with us because we were open nights by the